Well, welcome everyone to CityLawLIVE 2014. We're delighted to see you all here, especially those of you who've suffered the indignity of early morning trains, as I have. My name's Isla Grant. I'm the editor of Law Careers Net and the Training Contract and Pupillage Handbook, and your host for the day. Our aim at today's conference is to give you a behind-the-scenes look at what working in a city firm is really like, as well as advice on how to make impressive applications and excel at interview. We've convinced some of the city's most well-respected lawyers and recruiters from our roster of prestigious sponsor firms and the University of Law to come along and share their knowledge with you, the next generation of city lawyers. In terms of how to extract the most benefit from the day, well, my best bits of advice are on the inside page of your program in glorious Technicolor. So there's definitely no need for me to recite them out loud, but I'd urge you to take a look. Broadly speaking, today is about listening, talking, and networking. You've all been handpicked to be here, and we want to deliver an experience that will really help you to progress to the next stage. We'll do our bit if you do yours. We've got a packed day ahead, but my first duty is of the housekeeping variety. If you hear the fire alarm, you'll need to exit the building following the green exit signs and gather at Little George Street on the corner of Parliament Square and Storey's Gate. Our team and the venue staff will be there to help. So, back to what lies ahead today. Well, everything's detailed on the back of your program, so try and familiarise yourself with where you need to be and when. We have to be quite strict with the timings as there's an awful lot to cram in. This first session is designed to help you understand more about the city law career path and the businesses that make up this part of the profession. I'd like to welcome to the stage our keynote speaker, Mark Deem of Edwards Wildman Palmer. Mark is a commercial litigation partner specialising in TMT, financial services, and privacy and data protection disputes. He will speak about what it means to practice in the city in a changing legal profession, how he got to where he is today, and the challenges and opportunities that are a feature of the job. Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Isla. Good morning. It's great to see so many of you here today on what I see as very much the start of a journey for you all on the next very exciting phase of your legal careers, which began some point at the start of your legal education. I was particularly struck walking here today from Westminster Tube, as maybe you were as well, that we are in a very impressive building, but the location is equally impressive, because what you will have seen, those of you who had had some coffee and were looking around you, was that we are very much in the heart of what is the separation of powers here. Walking from Westminster, you looked to the left and you saw the Houses of Parliament, that is the legislature. You're walking through Whitehall, the executive, and for those of you who know where the Middlesex Guildhall used to be on Parliament Square, you will have seen the Supreme Court looking directly across at Parliament. It's very important, as you know, to understand the separation of powers, and it's very important that we as lawyers appreciate that. But what I really want to try to elaborate on in the next 15 minutes or so is that we now need to do a journey from the theory of law, the law that you're studying at the moment, about the separation of powers, to the practice of law. It's a very important journey you need to make because increasingly we are being asked by our clients to really have insight into their business and to be very commercial in the way that we approach it. And unfortunately for some of us, just being able to talk about the separation of powers or the very theoretical aspects of law is not going to be enough to be a lawyer in the 21st century. So that's what I really want to be talking about in the next 10-15 minutes or so, about the journey that we're just about to undertake. But it's great that we've all come here together to start that journey together. So why should you listen to me? Well, Isla's given you a little bit about my background. My journey started 20 years ago when I started law at Cambridge and then went on to Guildford, or now the University of Law. And in 1996, I applied for some summer placement schemes at Simmons & Simmons and Linklaters, and I spent a whole summer there. It was particularly exciting time for me to really be able to look at the law, look at the law firms that I was in, and really get a real feeling of what it meant to be a lawyer in the city. I came from the south coast, a sleepy village in Dorset, and actually I had no concept of either what London was like or what a law firm would be like. And in those 8 weeks, I didn't really do very much valuable work for any clients. But what I was able to do was I was able to get to see people that were working there. I could look at the trainees, I could challenge them. I could look at the associates and see whether or not that was the sort of work that I wanted to be doing. I then applied for my training contract, got a training contract at Linklaters, and I started there in 98 till 2000 when I qualified in the litigation team at Linklaters. And I stayed at Linklaters for almost 10 years in total before going to Edwards Goddard in 2008. So going from an international firm to a very much a national firm. In 2012, I joined my present home, Edwards Wildman, which is the London office of a US firm. Again, saw a different type of law and different way of going about practicing the law. And at some point along the way, I got partnership. Actually, I was at Adelshaws at the time. So what I've experienced along my way is an international firm, global firm, a national firm, a US firm. I've done the vacation schemes, I've done the training contracts, I've been where you've been, where you're sitting now. I've gone through that painful process of putting in lots of applications. So I think I am probably quite well qualified to give you my insights as to what we're going to be talking about. But the most important thing I think that we really need to get to grips with, first of all, is what does a lawyer do and who or what are lawyers? And what was particularly instructive in answering that question was when I had a conversation with my youngest son. I've got two boys, 7 and 5. It was about 6 months or so ago now. And my youngest sort of said, so Daddy, what is it that you do? And I said to him, well, what do you think I do? I'm a lawyer. What do you think I do? And he said, well, you go into London every day. We live outside London. He goes, you go on the train, don't you? He said, do you drive the train? I said, well, no, I don't, but I help people. And he said, oh, do you check their tickets? I said, no, I don't do that. I said, I help people if they're in trouble. So he said, are you a nurse, a doctor? And then we went through a few other things. I told him I sort of helped people learn about things. He said, are you a teacher? I said, we look about rights and wrongs. He said, are you a policeman? And gradually it suddenly dawned on me that it's very hard to describe, certainly to a 5-year-old, but actually it might be very difficult to describe to our families and our friends who are non-lawyers precisely what it is that a lawyer does. Because the reality is we are not all things to all people at all times, and we have different roles that we perform depending on who we're talking to at a moment in time. If we're talking to a client, we might be advising them, we might be helping them. If we're talking to our colleagues, junior people in the team, you might be nurturing them, you might be educating them. And being a lawyer is very much about all of these different things. But what I've become very aware of over my sort of 15 years in the city is more than anything, that the lawyer's role is actually changing. We're combining our advisory work, our help work, our nurturing work, to become what can only really be described as becoming a trusted advisor. A trusted advisor for our clients, a trusted advisor to those people who are immediately around us. And that's very much about what being a lawyer is about. And I want to talk a little bit about trust in a short while. Let's flip it on its head and let's actually think about what are the wrong reasons to do law. Because you're all here today and it's great that we've come together. Hopefully you're keeping with me and you're following where I'm going with this. But there will be a number of wrong reasons for wanting to do law. And some of these reasons may apply to you. And if that's true, well, great, because this is all part of that learning exercise. I'm not going to criticise anybody for it, but I think having awareness of what the wrong reasons to do law are is vital. If you want an easy life, I don't think you should be doing law. I don't think you're going to find yourself having a successful or promising career if you want an easy life. If you're doing it just for the status, you want to be able to say, that I'm a lawyer, again, not a great reason. If you want to do it for the money, not the best reason. If you want to do it because your parents think you should do it, again, it's not a very good reason. The reason you really want to be a lawyer is because you want to be motivated, or you're motivated to be a lawyer. It's something you really want to do. You have to have a passion for this as a profession. If you don't have that passion, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a very challenging time that you spend in a law or in a law firm. And the reason why you have to have motivation is because that's what's going to give you the edge. And if you speak to lots of people today on all of the stands out there, the one thing I think that you will hear coming back from everybody is that if you want to succeed, if you want to get that VAC scheme or the summer placement scheme place, if you want to get a training contract, you have to be able to demonstrate that you have a commitment, you have a motivation to want to do it. The other thing that you really need to gain that edge is some degree of commerciality. We've spoken a little bit about the need to really be having insight into a business, a client's business and what it is that they do, to become that trusted advisor. And I just wanted to sort of offer to you some thoughts about what trusted advisor actually means, or how you gain trust. There's a gentleman called David Maister who does a lot of insight into law firms and the way law firms work, and he's actually got a book called The Trusted Advisor. And in that he sets out what he calls the trust equation. He expresses it as T, or trustworthiness, equals C, credibility, plus R, reliability, plus I, which he refers to as intimacy. I'll explain a little bit more about that, so don't get too concerned. It's not the sort of intimacy you might be thinking about. But it's all divided by S, which is self-interest or self-awareness. What he's saying is not a numerical equation. We can't actually compute it in terms of figures, but it gives the right concept. We as lawyers, if we want to have the trust of our client, we have to be credible. We have to be able to give legal advice in a credible way, and that means we have to be commercial in the way that we do it. We have to be reliable. If the client says, are you going to be able to do something? Yes, we have to be able to commit to that, and we have to be able to do that. Intimacy, I think, is probably best expressed as comfort. Are the clients going to be comfortable with us? And can they trust us in that sense? Can they impart all the information that we need to know to make the valuable judgments for them? But here's the critical bit. It's all divided by self-interest. If you've got too much interest in the equation, or too much interest in what you're doing, actually trust is going to break down. You need to be able to demonstrate to your client that you are credible, that they can rely on you, that they can be comfortable in your presence, but that you're in it for them, not just for you. And if you can attack each of those different parts of that equation, I firmly believe that actually you're going to become a trusted advisor. Now, that doesn't just apply for lawyers, or maybe it does apply for lawyers, but just the widest sense. It applies to you today. So when you're going about those application processes, think about it. Make sure that your application is credible. Is the story, the narrative you're telling, does it really sort of hang together? When you're committing to something, when you're applying to the HR, the graduate teams, the law firms, you're speaking to partners, can they depend on you? Are you being reliable? Are you demonstrating yourself to be reliable? Can you demonstrate that people should be comfortable in your presence? The one bit I have struggled with here is the fact that self-interest, because clearly if you're applying for a VAC scheme, there is a lot of self-interest in such a thing. But I think what is important is you're not doing it for an ulterior motive which is not necessarily going to benefit the firm. And if you can demonstrate how you could benefit the firm as part of that process, I think it will really help you and hold you in good stead. So I want to move on to a little bit now about the future. I told you that I started my journey 20 years ago, back in 1994, and then summer placement 96 and training contract 98. Over that time, I've seen a lot of change. When I was first a trainee back in 1998, it was by no means standard that every trainee had a computer on their desk, unbelievably. It makes me sound like a right dinosaur, I know. Certainly, emails were not the primary means of communication. Mobile phones weren't standard issue for trainees, and life was in a way simple, but also quite difficult. And we had to learn processes, and we had to learn how to use the fax machine for starters, and a whole host of problems arrived with the fax machines. If you think that things can go wrong with social media today, back 15 years ago, the same sort of things used to happen. You know, sending an important fax to a client to some little old lady in Wales. It just doesn't, you know, these things really did happen back then. And so technology is really what has changed and what has really revolutionised our work. And it's going to carry on that way. I was interviewed for a programme on Radio 4 last week, and in that we're talking about artificial intelligence and the legal issues that are thrown up by artificial intelligence. And in that programme, Professor Suskind, who you may have heard of, came out with this line that said, well, you know, in 25 years' time, artificial intelligence may well actually replace the role of a lawyer. Thoughtful insight there, perhaps. I personally don't think that he's right on that. I think 25 years is far too long. I think the technology is here now. But before we all get too concerned, I think every cloud has a silver lining on this one. I think technology is going to change the way that we perform our roles. I don't think it's going to change our role, because there's always going to be a need for a lawyer for legal reasoning, at least so long as members of the legislature, executive, and the government and judiciary are all human. So technology is going to be absolutely vital. Embrace the technology, don't fear it. It is going to help us, it is going to help you as you go forward, and if anything, I think technology is going to make your lives far more exciting than it has for those of us that have been practicing to date. I think the real opportunities that technology is presenting now are going to remove those more mundane aspects, those more mundane roles, which quite frankly lawyers should not be performing. They can actually be performed by computers or technology. I've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I just want to quickly touch on the next steps for you. Some of you will have already been on summer placement schemes. Great. For those of you that haven't, I would encourage you to try to get on summer placement schemes if you possibly can. They provide you with a terrific insight into the world of work. But that's not where it ends. If you are on a summer placement scheme, when you're there, look around you, look at the trainees, look at the associates, ask questions, challenge people. Why is it that you should want to do what they're doing? What is it that really gets them jumping out of bed in the morning? What is it that they don't like doing? What is it that is not right for them about it? You then may go through an application process for a training contract. We've spoken a little bit about the need to be credible in the way that you actually present that. And then you have the training contract, a 2-year extension of your education in so many ways. But if you really want to be hitting the ground running as you do that training contract, it's thinking about issues of trust, commerciality, insight. It's really trying to move from where we are at the moment in the heartland of the separation of powers, a couple of miles to the east to what it really is like in the city, where our clients are not interested as such in our ability to be able to do the law. They want to know how we can make law apply to them in the real world. And just talking about technology as we were a few moments ago, this is probably best illustrated by one part of my practice where I do a lot of cyber work and lots of contentious data work. The prevailing statutes that we use when we're talking about data breach management or cyber attacks are the Computer Misuse Act, 1990, and the Data Protection Act, 1998. The iPhone came along in 2007. We are having to use old laws to deal with new technologies and new problems. And we have to start thinking about that. Just reciting the law isn't going to be enough. We have to be able to interpret those laws and show our clients how it is relevant and how it can help them in their business at the moment. That is absolutely fundamental. That's really all I wanted to sort of touch on here today. You've got a great opportunity. There are lots of fantastic individuals who will be in the room, who will be speaking to you later. Isla sort of said at the beginning, I think listening and talking are 2 of the real things that you need to do. Challenge people. That's the 3rd one I would add to that. There is no point in you just being here and just being shrinking violet. Come up to us, talk to us, challenge us about what it is and why it is that you should be so keen and so motivated to make the application process. We don't have time to do questions and answers now. We do have a break session, I think, at 11:05, and I'll make myself available next door if anyone has any burning questions that they want to ask me. But I just want to leave you with one thought. We've spoken a lot about journeys, and coming together here today was really the start of that journey for you today. Hopefully you've followed me along a little bit of that journey and how I've mapped out where the future goes. And I just want to leave you with the words of Henry Ford, who says that coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, but it's working together that's true success. And I wish you success, because I believe that if you join this journey with us now, that actually one day we will be working together, and that would be true success for you and hopefully for us too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that illuminating view of life as a city lawyer. I'm sure there'll be many here who hope to follow in your footsteps. I'm now going to invite the panellists to join me on stage. This first panel of the day is entitled "The Law Firm as a Business." The ability to display some awareness of the fact that law firms operate as commercial entities, advising commercial clients, is key when it comes to convincing recruiters that you understand something about their organisations. The panel will discuss how law firms function as businesses, what the future may look like for the trainees within those firms, and some of the attributes that define a successful commercial lawyer. During the discussion, there will be points when we can take questions from the audience with our roving mics, but just hold your questions until then. So it's now my pleasure to hand you over to the panellists. The session is being chaired by Jonathan Wood of Weil Gotshal Manges. Jonathan is a corporate partner in the firm's London office, advising private equity institutions and investors on domestic and cross-border M&A. He is also the head of the firm's graduate recruitment committee, so he knows his stuff on that front too. Jonathan, many thanks, and over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Isla, and welcome everyone this morning. My job this morning really is to chair this all-star panel discussion. And our aim really over the next 15 minutes is to build on some of the themes that Mark has already talked to you about this morning. But really to focus more particularly on the law firms themselves, how the business looks now, and how it's evolving, how it might impact you and your decision making, and how you need to focus your energy and attention in terms of making your decisions as to where you want to train and what the opportunities might be for you. I'll come on in a little bit to how we're going to go through that. And in a second, I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves and give you a little bit of information about their background. We'd like to make the session as interactive as possible. So the way that I think that I'll do that is I'll raise some questions as we go through to each of our panelists, and they'll respond to those questions. And we'll get a bit of discussion going on each of those topics. And then at the end of a little bit of discussion, we'll open the floor up to you guys, and we'd love it if you would ask some questions at the end of each of those three distinct areas that we're going to talk about. We'll try and limit the questions to sort of 3 or 4, depending on how we go timing-wise, and you will take it from there. In terms of the questions, I just ask 2 things. One is if you could focus your questions more on the sort of generic subject matter that we're talking about, rather than asking questions specifically about any of the law firms that we work with. And there'll be opportunity to quiz us next door later, or to talk about it in some of the networking sessions later in the day. And I think the second one is keep it clean and polite. So can I maybe just hand over and introduce each member, to allow each member of the panel to introduce themselves. Ashley, perhaps you would like to start.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Young. I'm a finance partner at Kirkland & Ellis. I started my career at Norton Rose actually as a trainee, and interestingly the day I qualified, my entire team resigned to go to a different firm. And so then I moved to Allen & Overy. I was at Allen & Overy for about 10 years, in Paris, in Japan, and then in Hong Kong. And then I moved to Caney in Hong Kong and returned to London about 6 months ago. My practice focuses on leverage buyout transactions, so the kind of banking and finance side of what Jonathan's practice is, essentially.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Dyke. I'm a partner at Denton's. I specialise in asset finance, and I do a lot of what I call boys' toys, so financing corporate jets and super yachts, which is not very glamorous, although it sounds it. I started with one of the Denton's legacy firms, World Sapped, as a trainee, so I'm sort of fairly unique in that I've been at the same firm for my entire career. One of the key things that I got from my training contract was to keep an open mind and to embrace all opportunities, even when I got sent to Crown Court to repossess someone's house. And when I was reading through all of the witness statements beforehand, I said to my supervisor, it appears that he's made death threats against everyone who's acting on the other side. So it was quite interesting to have to go there. And I think it was only at that point when I'd made that point that my supervisor thought, oh, maybe it's not a great idea to send her on her own. But it's just about surviving sometimes.
Morning, my name's Dan Martin. I'm a partner in the restructuring group at Ropes & Gray. Joined Ropes just after the office opened in 2010, having been at Weil Gotshal for about just over 6 years. And I started life at Clifford Chance and left there when I was about 2 years qualified. A lot of trainee candidates, when you're interviewing them, ask you why you would have left the Magic Circle at quite an early stage of your career. And my answer is that I qualified into the same team as my girlfriend, and then I married her, and it was just getting a little bit awkward every day. So.
Good reason. And I'm Sanja Udovicic. I'm a partner in the project finance group at Shearman Sterling. I've been with the same team since '95. I started with them at Millbank, and then we moved as a team. I was the most junior person about a year later. And that probably horrifies some of you in this room, thinking that you'd be in one team for such a long time. But I have to say, I have at Shearman worked in New York, London, of course, Singapore, Hong Kong. I've been sent on 2 secondments, and I don't think I've had 2 days which have been the same. I've had an incredible journey, amazing deals, some harder than others, some more fun than others, but I really have not at all regretted being within that one team. So over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Just in terms of my background as well, I've been at Weil for about 8.5 years, before which I was at what's now called Hogan Lovells. It was called Lovells at the time, and I was there for around 10 years. So as you can see, we've all actually had sort of similar backgrounds in that we've been in some firms, we've moved from one firm to another firm, we've been in maybe traditional UK or English law firms and then moved to a US law firm type environment, and some of us have worked in different countries. So we've seen lots of change in the profession over the last, the arc of our careers so far. In fact, huge amounts of change. And we've seen the size and shape and origin of some of those law firms in that period change quite dramatically. And even how the market works. So we've seen, for example, in private equity and M&A transactions, even if you looked in the last 12 months at the biggest deals in the market and which law firms actually acted or took a leading role in those transactions, that group of law firms would probably look very different than it would if you went 5 years back and looked at the law firms who were seen as leading those particular transactions then. Some of them are the same, some of them are slightly different. So there are some clear sort of changes in our market that are worth you understanding. Ashley, maybe you would like to start us off just by talking about what you see as the key trends in terms of the firms that are operating in the city now, and what do you think is driving some of those changes?
It's changed quite a bit, particularly over the past kind of 5 or 10 years, and I'll kind of talk about my practice and what I'm most familiar with, which is the private equity business, but that has been driving a lot of the change, and so it's a useful thing to talk about. We saw when I started in 2000, a number of US firms had started to build a business in London, but they were quite small teams, quite discrete teams, and focused on particular clients. And that wasn't universal because there were firms focused on different parts of the business and on broader financing, etc. But if you look at firms like my firm, Kirkland & Ellis, Simpson Thacher and others, Weil at the time, there were small teams focused around core clients. And over time, that market has grown so significantly for private equity work in Europe, and the US headquartered funds have built their business in Europe rapidly, that there's been more opportunity for those firms with those key clients and then to develop relationships with other clients that operate in the same industry. And so the biggest buyout funds in the world, like Bain Capital and KKR and Blackstone, have developed and built their business quite a lot. And those firms have grown and built around those clients. And that's driven quite a lot of the growth. And those firms have kind of taken more of a foothold, therefore, in the London market than they had previously.
Do you think, because private equity as an asset class, and in terms of where it was in the M&A landscape and its growth, do you think that the fact that the US firms have been very heavily involved in that market has changed the perception of US firms operating in M&A generally in the UK and the European markets?
I think it has, because the the private equity business started taking on bigger and bigger deals, and so we're able to make an offer for a public company and take it private, and that then introduces them to the type of deal and the type of intermediary that works on those deals. And you saw then a number of US firms hire senior public company lawyers. So Graham White at Caney, who was at Linklaters, and some other key people who've kind of moved around the market. And that's the kind of firm taking the opportunity presented by the deals that their clients have brought them into to grow the practice, to build the business.
Okay. Your area is obviously finance. Finance has changed very dramatically in the last 5 years, or certainly since the credit crunch. Do you think that's had an impact now on the way that some of the law firms are operating in the market and maybe accessing the US financing markets for European businesses and the increase in high yield?
I think it has. It's been a kind of evolution, and so the kind of non-bank market has been around for a while. So that's kind of what you wouldn't typically think of as a bank making available credit for leverage buyouts, so pension funds, insurance companies, etc. And as you say, more recently, accessing the high yield market in the US, what used to be called the junk bond market, and so issuing bonds for the purposes of financing an acquisition, and all of that. Those kind of products are converging really, and they're converging between what are classically European financing techniques and US techniques, and so that lends itself actually to the strength of some US firms, or any firm that has a deep US bench, and obviously the what I call Anglo-Saxon heritage firms have built their own businesses in the US as well.
Okay. So we can see that some of these market-driven activities have actually shaped a little bit about what's happening in the legal services market in the UK. The other area of growth, I guess, is through mergers, and we've seen a lot of firms grow by merging with other firms, and there's actually quite a lot of that activity now, even internationally. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I mean, we've seen. There's kind of been 3 or 4 waves of mergers, haven't there? So a lot of the Anglo-Saxon firms did kind of European mergers in the kind of 80s, 90s to kind of build out that European network of offices. And then there have been some kind of transatlantic mergers, but those have been less frequent and slightly different in nature. And so Clifford Chance merged with Rogers and Wells at kind of in 99, 2000. You've seen your legacy firm Lovells merge with Hogan and Hartson to form Hogan Lovells, and they're really interesting as a business decision because there are issues in terms of how you do a merger. There's basic profitability. Do the firms have the same level of profitability to come together? What do you do with redundant practices? If you've got 2 people who do exactly the same thing, how do you deal with that? But probably the biggest challenge is just culture. Do the 2 firms have the same existing culture? Can they work together? Can the people work as one firm? I think there have been some success stories, and it's a good way to grow a business internationally quickly, but there have been some situations, I think, where that hasn't been as successful.
Yeah, I think David's in detail. Sorry.
Can I just also comment on one other key trend that I think we're seeing more and more, and that is the increasing globalization of the business we do, the deals that we do. And as you see capital flows go from the developed world to the developing world, looking for new opportunities, looking for greater returns, we are seeing more and more that the largest transactions we're doing are involving elements from Asia as well as the Middle East, from the States. So for a project financing, for example, that might be based in Central Asia, let's say Uzbekistan, we're seeing lenders coming in from Korea, from the multilateral development agencies like Asian Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, lenders coming in from Europe as well. And it's increasingly important, I think, for the firms to have offices and practices in the relevant areas, in the relevant time zones, people who are familiar with dealing with Korean agencies, for example, who also have offices in Paris and in London, who can really bring it all together, so that when you're offering a team to a set of clients, you need to actually be able to respond to them in real time and in the right time zones, in the right languages often. Yeah. So I think that increasingly these mergers have been very important, but also the growth of firms and the opening of various offices to respond to client needs and to actually ensure that we are offering exactly what our clients need to get their deals done.
I think you're right, and actually one of the interesting stories there is the kind of Norton Rose, Fulbright kind of business. You know, Norton Rose have now got a Canadian part, South Africa, Australian, and then merged with Fulbright and Janowski to kind of add the US piece, and that was all around a particular product, really, isn't it? The energy, infrastructure business, and you're right, the globalization of particularly that business has led firms to seek out some of these mergers and work out how they're going to deliver to clients the right service, the right solution.
I think we've also had to react to the globalization of our clients, because our clients are becoming more global. We then have to be able to represent them in all of the areas and jurisdictions that they want legal advice.
It's clear that our clients' activity drives often what we do, but the overall legal market obviously has an impact on the way that law firms behave and respond and decide to grow or change direction. When I started, when we all started, you know, year on year, there just seemed to be more and more work around. Businesses just seemed to grow. There were more deals. It was all very, very kind of buoyant. But obviously, we've been through this incredibly kind of tumultuous period in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, 5 to 9 years, and that's had an impact clearly on law firms. And there's a question, I guess, as to whether the market for legal services is continuing to grow, or do you think it's flattened out? So do you want to comment on that?
Everyone is now talking about the new normal. And Jonathan's right that when we all started our careers, work was just flooding in. It's a totally different environment now. In addition to there being more legal participants in the market, so more people are competing for the work. There is less work around. I do a lot of bank work. They are far more cautious than they were previously. Everything takes a very, very long time to get through credit committees. They are very risk averse. We don't have the same kind of exciting, cutting edge transactions that we used to have, and certainly not in the quantity that we used to have. The requirements of borrowers are increasing to the extent that some borrowers just can't comply with bank lending requirements. And so everyone sort of says, well, is it going to change? And I don't think it will for the foreseeable future. I think lots of people were burnt during the recession, and that's going to take a long time for us and for our clients to forget it. And it's not such a bad thing. There were deals done in the boom period that shouldn't have been done, and it just kind of got a bit crazy.
I think that's one of the things I've certainly seen in my practice, is that the amount of lawyering you have to do on the transaction now is more significant than perhaps it was when you were in that period of incredible sort of buoyancy. So you've actually really got to think hard about it. You've got to deal with very complex situations. And people are much more risk averse. So it's actually a very interesting, exciting time, I think, to be a lawyer, because you really have to get stuck into the detail of it and really understand it and come up with some very interesting and innovative ways forward to sort of try and unlock some of these issues that people are facing on transactions. So on one level, the market is has struggled. I think that law firms have responded to that by looking at different geographies and different practice areas, and maybe being cautious about areas that once were very buoyant but are less so now, and just sort of repositioning themselves over this last sort 5-year period to the point where they actually understand, have a much better feel for where the market is now and what their growth rates are going to be going forward. So the great thing for you guys is that actually at this point there is a bit more stability, it is more settled, and people have got a different view, a more clear view on what they need going forwards and what your role as somebody entering the profession at this stage is going to take. So actually I think it's quite an exciting time because there is this global expansion, a lot more technical lawyering, but a little bit more stability now, certainly more than there was in the last 3 or 4 years.
Can I jump in again? I think there's also, we're starting to see somewhat of a differentiation as well in law firms. Some of the work that is relatively straightforward and commoditized, I think there's an awful lot of competition out there and pricing pressure. We may be talking about this later. But I think what law firms, particularly at the high end, are having to do is really try and be strategic about where they're going to focus their efforts on, their marketing efforts, their client development efforts, etc. And we've been really trying to do that within Shearman, and particularly within the project finance group. We did an awful lot of work in the Middle East on power transactions, building power and water deals, plants in the Middle East. We're seeing that work is now highly commoditized. A lot of people can do it, and that, it's no longer as interesting as it was. So we're really looking at challenging frontier jurisdictions for the next big deals, places where it hasn't been done before, where we can really bring value because we can bring in best practices from all of the places we worked, but also different industries. The financing of nuclear power, large oil and gas transactions, LNG, etc. So I think as firms, we're constantly being challenged also to think more strategically about our business. And this is something that you should all be doing really early on as well. It's never too soon to really start thinking strategically about what it is that you want to do. Where do you want to end up in 5 years? Because you should be building now the blocks that you need to get there. Figure out which firms suit you, which firms are doing the kind of work you want to be doing, and then try and get the experience in order to get on that path.
Sorry, it's actually, it can be incredibly confusing actually, at this stage, because many of the firms look quite similar. Yes. On paper. If you look at us all, we all say we're all international firms. We all say similar things about the types of practice areas that we often specialize in. There are obviously some differences, but often just looking at it cold, it can look quite similar. But actually, when you scrape the surface, lots of firms are very, very different, and they've got very sort of different cultural heritage and a different feel. Could you maybe just comment on that, Sonia, just about some of those cultural differences, how a law firm maybe sets its culture, what are the drivers to that, what practical differences might it make for these guys, as they enter their careers?
Sure. Although I've been within the same firm since '96, I've moved around a bit, so I've seen the different cultures in different offices, and clearly there's an overall firm culture which is somewhat sort of top-down driven, but the culture within offices is also very different. And I think you will find, although I haven't worked within one of the Magic Circle firms, I've spoken to a lot of people who have. A lot of our trainees spent summer vacation schemes there, chose to come to us. Associates who come from the Magic Circle firms, there are different cultures. And I think one of the advantages that the US firms have, I think, in London specifically, is that they're relatively smaller offices. We have an office of approximately 130 lawyers and probably overall about 260 staff. That makes for a very different, a much more intimate culture. You know an awful lot more people than you might do at one of the large Magic Circle firms.
How do you find out about it, do you think? How do you...
Well, this goes back to what Isla was saying, you know, listen and talk to people, network, you know, when you're at the vacation schemes, I'm sure you guys know this already, but it's an opportunity for you to evaluate that culture, actually challenge people, as Mark said, really ask them the questions that you want the answers to, and listen to what they say at all levels. You know, you will hear from the partners to the senior associates, junior associates, trainees. They will all have their own perspective of what the culture of that particular firm is, but you will start to see that there really is a culture that is different to another firm that you might have done a vacation scheme.
Yeah.
And I think I'd just add to that, don't buy into anybody who's trying to sell you a generalisation that US firms are one way or Magic Circle firms are another way. There's no substitute for getting under the hood yourself, speaking to people and making up your own mind, because the English firms are all very different from one another, and the US firms are hugely different from one another.
This might be a good moment to ask some questions of you guys. Would anybody like to ask a question?
There's quite a lot of international experience over here. How have you found working in different countries compared to where you graduated from?
Well, I've only moved from Scotland to England, so I'm right. And it's vastly different. Yeah, so I'll leave it to these guys to comment.
I'll start, and Sunny's been abroad as well. It's exciting, you know, it's interesting. It depends what you're doing in the particular place that you go to. So Paris was very similar to what I was doing in London. It was just kind of, you know, European and pan-European financing deals. Japan was like living on the moon. It still is one of the most foreign places I've ever been, and kind of acclimatization took some time, both in terms of personal life, but also understanding how the client operates and the decision-making process, which is different to it is in the West. But you know, a great opportunity to understand that culture and to have that chance to work abroad. I really recommend it and enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes life really, really interesting. I spent 10 years in Asia, and in that time, you know, I worked in Mongolia, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, etc., etc. And every culture is different. Every country has its own drivers and different cultures, and you really, as a lawyer, need to understand those. So the best way of doing that is to talk to your clients and talk to other people. I spent my entire time talking to everyone I could. You know, when I landed in Bangkok, starting to talk to the taxi driver to start to understand what makes Bangkok tick. And after a few years of working in Thailand, I'd like to think that I understand Thai culture a little bit better. But I found it absolutely fascinating, and it's very interesting to me how the cultural drivers actually change the way that deals are negotiated, the way they're structured, the way they're written up, because it all needs to fit in. The transaction that you are negotiating and structuring and writing up, drafting and finalizing, has to fit into the specific culture that you're operating in. And there are different ways of dealing with different issues that come up. You need to be aware of those and then respond to them.
I think in most international firms, even if you're based in London, you tend to find you have a very international experience in terms of who you're going to be working with and the transactions that you'll be involved in. And actually those cultural differences and local market practices and all of those things are vitally important to understand early, because you can very easily put your foot in it pretty rapidly by not acknowledging those and recognizing them and trying to learn them and understand them early. So you do get, you know, that is one of the big challenges about working, even based in London, in an international environment, and really understanding and getting to grips with that. Can I ask anybody else?
Building on, you spoke about competition. are law firms worried about the threat of multidisciplinary practices and sort of the big four accountancy firms moving into the legal sector, or is that not much of a threat yet?
Well, when I started back in 2000, all of the big accountancy firms had legal practices, and they all didn't have them a couple of years later. And I remember at Clifford Chance, we swept up some of the poor trainees at Garrett's after that all collapsed. So they've done it before and it didn't work last time. And I don't think if they do set them up again, they'll be going after the premium high-end work. I think that the key target for them will be the sorts of commoditized work that were mentioned earlier, and that they'll be able to package and produce from regional offices for a much cheaper price. But I don't think they'll go after the high-end work. The other thing to mention is their innate conflict position, because they will audit, a quarter of the market each. So the conflicts are going to be absolutely rife there.
I agree, actually, with most of that. Can we have a question from this side of the room, and then we should move on? This one up at the back.
Going on your point about different firms, different cultures, to what extent will this affect the work that trainees do? Like, how different is the work that trainees do at different firms, and what will this depend on?
Well, there are lots of different features. So, for example, most of us now, well, all of us in this panel work in a firm that hasn't got thousands of people in it in the London office. Slightly smaller, and that environment means that you have a much more hands-on role in terms of what you do on a day-to-day basis. Your role is extremely important. The teams tend to be a little bit smaller, and you're perhaps, arguably, I think, pushed on that little bit sort of further. If you find yourself in a Magic Circle firm where you've got, you're one of 90 or 100 in a trainee intake, you'll still obviously get a fantastic training experience, but there's just much more people around, and whether the work actually gets pushed all the way down to you at quite the earlier stage, is debatable. I mean, I've been in a large English law firm, and remember having to fight more for the more interesting, more challenging work when I was there than I think our trainees probably do here. So that's one kind of key difference in terms of what you're looking at.
I think the work you will do is probably very similar, whichever choice you make. The culture is kind of a little bit more about fit and just working out where you feel most comfortable, and that can mean size, but it can mean people, or it can mean type of work that you're interested in. But the experience day to day, I imagine, is probably pretty similar whichever choice you make. And you can see from all of us here that if you make a choice based on fit, provided you, and it goes back to what the keynote speaker was saying, provided you show interest and get involved, you will develop and you will succeed, and then you can always choose to move at the right time. You can see that we've all moved. Yeah. Well, apart from Sonny, we've three of us have moved. But there is that, there is that ability. But fit, culture goes to fit, I think, and whether you feel comfortable.
I mean, I do think though that you're absolutely right. The work is going to be very similar, but your access to the work, I think, will be different. I agree with Jonathan on this. If you're one of an intake of 20 as opposed to one of an intake of 100, you're much more visible, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. On a day when you're not at your best, you might not enjoy it. But generally, it's a great thing because you can really sort of choose the kind of work that you want to do. The more responsibility you get given and the better you do, the more likely you are to get more responsibility and better work, more drafting, etc. Because you will be absolutely known to the entire team that you're working with, right? So very quickly you can shine in that environment. It's more difficult, I think, to do that if you're one of 100.
The flip side, though, is that most of the firms that we are at have a very kind of transactional focused type of environment. So we haven't got armies of specialist lawyers. I think all of us have teams that work in specialist disciplines, but clearly not as many as you might find in a magistrate circle law firm. So, if your focus is advising on pension trustees, on day-to-day pensions advice, or, corporates on day-to-day employment matters, some of the firms that we're at may not necessarily be the right fit for you. And that's not, a bad or a good thing. You just got to work out what type of law that you're really interested in and which firms actually provide that. So you just got to try and get under the skin of it a bit. Okay, we should probably move on a little bit and talk about, the future of trainees and what all of this means to you. So Dan, given some of the pressures that we've talked about on the legal sort of industry or profession, and arguably maybe a slightly flatter or tighter market that we're all operating in, do you think that law firms still place as much emphasis on graduate recruitment now than they once did? Or do you still think it's a vitally important thing for them?
I think the focus is still there. I think the numbers of trainees are lower now than they were when I came through the mill. I think Clifford Chance took on 120 per year back then. I think Linklaters were probably even more. So I think they still have the same quantities of people focused on graduate recruitment, and I think the profession as a whole still sees it as a very important part of our business. And I think there's a few different elements to why that is. There's the purely selfish element. I think most law firms in London would have an attrition rates of somewhere between 15 and 20% a year. That's a huge number of people leaving at any given time. And so you need to, if you're assuming your business is going to stay at worst constant, you're going to need to replace those people. There's the economic point, which I think we'll come on to in a minute, as to how law firms make their money and how clients want to pay for it. And it won't surprise you to learn that clients drive ever harder bargains. And having people at the junior end means you can charge them out at a cheaper rate. And as long as they're adequately supervised, then the work is getting done. But there's also the sort of more altruistic side of it. I think teaching somebody about how to do a given thing not only benefits the person being taught, but it benefits the teacher, because you have to break down whatever the given task is and really ensure that you understand it and that you can explain it in a way that can be understood by anyone, and that's got a very two-way benefit to it. And the other thing is that, a lot of people still view this, when you're in partnership, as being a custodian of a business for a period of time, and wanting to ensure that the business will survive once you go away and retire to the Caribbean. And so all of those elements mean I think it's still an important focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually still vitally important, in fact, because it is about that custodianship thing, but it's about developing, the new talent that's going to come into your business, help your business develop and grow. You guys have got a very interesting and slightly different view of the world than perhaps we did when we first started, and it's much more reflective of where, all of your contemporaries are, who are entering into, corporates, into banks, into all the people who will become our clients. And we really need to bring you into the business and encourage you and take you forward. So you're basically the lifeblood of city law firms, or law firms generally. So there's no doubt that it's as important as ever. It's very, very competitive for us all to attract you. But it is understandably quite tough for you guys to get in. I think the other thing is, we talked about it earlier, we have gone through a period of quite incredible flux, whereas I think now there is starting to be a little bit more visibility in the way things are developing, and a bit more certainty for you as you start and venture into your career. So, I think it's pretty important. We touched on this just before, and we have talked a little bit about some of the different law firms that are in the market. Ashley, would you say there's kind of wider choice now than there's ever been in the market for people entering the profession?
I think there probably is, both in terms of size and what firms specialise in. There are, certainly in London, there are more US firms that are established than there ever have been. and new ones popping up and growing their practices all the time. You know, something like Gibson Dunn is a new entrant that's hired Charlie Geffen from Ashurst, and you know, is clearly building their practice. That presents an opportunity. They're going to be building a team and hiring people, and all of the options that were there originally are still there. All of the Magic Circle, the kind of Silver Circle, the national firms. I think there's a bit more of a blur now between all of the options. They're all a bit more credible, if you like, than they would have been when I joined. I think people were more attracted to, you know, the Magic Circle as a default option, and it wasn't necessarily the right option for everybody, but that was more the mindset. I think now there's a much bigger opportunity set for you to review and decide how you know, which is the right fit and how you want to start your career.
I mean, I think there's also, there's been an evolution, I think, within the American firms in terms of the training program. I mean, you're absolutely right, Ashley. You know, 15 years ago, it was probably fair to say that the US firms didn't have quite the same offering in terms of regular training as the Magic Circle firms had. I think that's really changed, particularly the firms who've had training contracts for a number of years now, over a decade. And I would say that our training program now is as good as any of the large Magic Circle firms. And I think we're getting very good feedback from our trainees on that, and that you know, really there's a lot of opportunity to listen to internal, external speakers on a wide variety of topics. And we'll probably touch on this later, but just in case we run out.
Well, I'll sort of mention it now, because I think I was going to ask Sarah something on this. I mean,
Okay.
one of the things, when I started, we all started, there used to be a very strong focus on the technical black letter law training. So there was a lot of classroom-style training, and it was all very interesting. Now, clearly, we still deliver that, but more of it's delivered in a tutorial-type context, or, you know, smaller groups. The other feature, though, is that I think that there's a bit more of an emphasis on wider training, not just on that black letter law technical side. Do you want to comment on that?
I think that's right. When we all started, the role of a lawyer was very different. You're now expected to be a salesman as well as a lawyer. And so you have to be able to build those skills. And so although there is still the same level of technical training, in addition to that, there'll be the softer skills, so business development, how to work a room, how to approach clients. And so the training program has been completely overhauled in all of the firms. Because if you can't bring in clients, you can't maintain clients, then you have no business. And because we're all becoming a lot more corporate, if you don't have a business, then you just can't survive as a lawyer.
Sorry,
go ahead.
And I think firms over the last 10 years have started to realise that it's important to put that in at the earliest possible stage, because one of the things that you realise very quickly is how rapidly your contacts and your peers, your friends from university, will rise through their positions in the hedge funds or the private equity funds or the banks that they join. And having junior people being able to bring in work is, you know, that's absolutely the best thing possible for a law firm.
So I think one of the other features we've seen is around diversity and inclusion. So, you know, firms rightly place a real emphasis now on creating an environment in which everybody has the opportunity to develop in a supported and, you know, encouraged way, with equal opportunities, obviously. Could you comment on that a little bit? You talked to us a little bit about some of the importance of some of the diversity and inclusion principles that firms adopt.
Sure. I mean, I think there are lots of reasons why this is important for firms, but maybe I'll just touch on you know, three that I think are really the sort of fundamentally important reasons. One is that, you know, all of the studies demonstrate that diverse businesses are better businesses. They make more money, they make better decisions. So, you know, and this is not just important for law firms, it's important across the board for all industries, all sectors, for banks, for corporates, for governments, etc. So, you know, as a matter of good business, we need to make sure that we're a diverse business. Two, I think we need to continue to attract the brightest and the best. And I think that if we're not a diverse business, and we're not a business that can show that there is a career path for women, minorities, the LGBT community, the people with disabilities, then those people will go to other sectors and other businesses. They'll go to the corporates, they'll go to the banks, and that will mean that we are less and less representative of our clients. You know, if we see, you know, more women going off to become bankers and to go into the corporate world, it'll be more and more difficult for us to present a panel to Revlon to do a major M&A transaction for them if all we can offer them is you know, 5 middle-aged white men partners at the pitch, none of whom are wearing mascara. So we need to, you know, keep up with the times and keep up with our clients, and hire the brightest of the best. So those 3 things we want to ensure we've got a diverse business that's representative and that is attracting all segments. It's also incredibly important, I think, for the culture and you know, the working day. I think if you're working with people who are all like you, it becomes very boring, I think. So all of those.
Can I just open it up to the floor just for a couple of questions, and then we'll start to wrap up. This one here. Yeah. There's a mic coming.
Sorry for the confusion. I was wondering, on the topic that we were just discussing, what would your opinion be on quotas for diversity, for introducing women as partners, for the LGBT community and so on? Do you think that is a good way of reaching that goal, or is it just an artificial means, and would it bring more harm than good? Thank you.
That's a good question. I can take it if you want. Quotas would be a good thing. I'm a gay man, and that would have been great for me. I would have made it more quickly. I think it's about creating the culture and making sure that it's the same opportunity set for everyone. In my view, having particular goals are not the way to achieve that. But being cognizant of where you stand and recognizing that you want a more diverse community is the first step, but then saying we must have, you know, 1/3 women partners, or 2/3 of our board must be, you know, a particular subset, I think can be a bit challenging. And I struggle with that, thinking, well, you know, but it does achieve something and it challenges people. But I think you can challenge in other ways without the actual, the quota as the thing that drives that.
It's a very sort of emotive topic, this. I think different people have very different views, and I think culturally there's a difference as well. In Europe, there's generally been a history of quotas in various sectors, and that we've seen that actually that has worked quite well. In the US, however, it's almost anathema. I mean, it's not seen in government, and therefore it's not really seen in business. My own personal view is that it can be made to work, and I've seen this work. I was seconded to the Asian Development Bank in 2005, and they've remained an incredibly important client for me. Even here, they're based in Manila, but I'm still working with them here because we're doing things in Central Asia and in Africa, etc. They introduced quotas for women in management, and there was an awful lot of chatter when they did it. There were a lot of people were very unhappy about this. You know, men were saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous. These people are just being promoted because they're women. They haven't been promoted because, you know, they were the right person for the job." That chatter apparently lasted about a year, and at the end of the year, what people saw was that these women were doing an incredibly good job, for the large part. I'm sure there were some exceptions, but they were qualified to do the job. They were doing a great job, and they had changed the culture. And all the studies show that once you change the culture at the top, it's much more likely that you will change the culture in a sustainable way. Because if you're trying to do it bottom up, it's like pushing a rock up that mountain. It just keeps wanting to roll down. But if you change culture at the top, if you change diversity, if you've got a more diverse management team, it filters down. You start to, and then it becomes irrelevant whether it's a man or a woman who's applying for the job. It's just the best person for the job, and you're not combating some of the sort of unconscious biases that I think we have all been party to at different times, that we are all ourselves guilty of. And we're doing a lot of this, training for generational diversity, training to recognize and deal with unconscious biases at work, etc., to really, make it more of a level playing field. But I personally think that quotas could be a good thing. And if not quotas, targets.
We were going to go on and talk about what makes a good commercial law, and I think we're slightly out of time. I think the better way to deal, we've got still a couple of minutes left, is that right? Yeah. I just wondered if we can just open it up to the floor and you just ask questions on any subject you like, and it probably, yeah. There's one at the back.
I was just wondering, considering the recent progress there's been in alternative fee arrangements and new business structures that law firms are beginning to employ, where do you all see the future of law firms as a business going?
That's quite a challenging one. I think that there's been a bit of a sort of bifurcation actually in the last sort of 5 years in terms of some of the firms that you're seeing working on an international level. So there's a group that is very much focused on the main financial centres, the more complex, more difficult, more sophisticated kind of end of the market and less fee-sensitive end of the market. And there's another group that tend to have looked at slightly more commoditised work and more volume-related business, and maybe a wider geographic focus. There's no right or wrong way of doing those. They're two very different sort of business models, and you have to make them work. There's no doubt that we are under constant fee pressure. Clients, are very alive to this, and we've also been through this difficult period in the last few years. But I think firms now just understand more about how they generate their profit, how they have to structure their fees and fee arrangements to fit in with the client's expectation. So I think the answer is that the market will continue. There will be some, I think, in probably both of those two levels, where you will see those either, those firms either focus on the higher end, less fee sensitive work, the more, the other firms that have a wider geographic focus, maybe more commoditized work, but just with a slightly more caution around how they're making money, how they're becoming, they're maintaining the levels of profitability. And I think those actually are some of the things that firms are going to really, find difficult in the years to come, because we've come off this period of incredible growth to a period where the growth overall is not really there so much. So there's a bit more kind of competition to win market share from your competitors. So I think we will see a bit of an interesting time ahead, but I think fundamentally the market started to move in those two directions, and I think it will continue probably in that way. I've got one more question, and then I think we'll have to call it a day.
How do firms go about establishing new relationships with new clients, so essentially bringing in new business and maintaining those relationships?
It depends which practice area you're in, frankly. So, if you look at private equity, and we're in a very similar world, it's a very personal, relationship-driven environment. So the market participants, the individuals in them, and you will see each other on the other side of deals, for example, or one client might be with one organisation and move to another organisation, and you use that as an opportunity to follow that client somewhere else. Every opportunity you get on the opposite side of a transaction to see somebody, then obviously you take it. So, a lot of it is very personal, relationship driven. You've obviously got an eye on how you're developing your business the whole time, and making sure that you're taking steps to capitalise on the opportunities that present themselves. Other bits of business are very different to that, and they're much more institutionally focused. So just taking a step back, that's about kind of winning business in the first place. Then you've got to try and institutionalize that relationship and cross-sell your partners and your other offices to make that a much more stable, firm-wide relationship. With bigger corporates, that's harder because there are lots of different touch points, and firms obviously start to, corporates are very careful about how they're spending the money and whether one firm is the right place to spend all the money or how they want to spread that for different types of work that they will generate. So I think it's about creating as many touch points as possible, but obviously being very careful about what you're trying to sell and not oversell. It really depends. I mean, the source of clients is very broad, and you really have to adapt your style and your approach to fit with that particular organisation. But lots of it is really personal, relationship driven. It's about people. It's a very people-focused environment. It's what Mark was saying earlier on about that sort of trust and intimacy component. If you find people that want to work with you and you like working with them, then it becomes easier.
Yeah.
But you've got to work hard at that.
I can't overemphasize the importance of personal relationships with your clients, with colleagues, with people that you're collaborating with, people that you're working with on the other side. And there are lots of ways of getting to know a client. It's difficult to do the initial cold call, and there are a number of things that you can do to sort of make it interesting, because they're being called by lots of different people and they already have established relationships. So often it helps if you can, first of all, you need to know their business very well, and this is true for everything we do. Clients are not interested in lawyers who don't understand what they do. They will be much more interested if you know them, if you know what they do, and then if you can offer them something. So figure out a topic that might be of interest to them, or just talk to them about which topics might be, and say, well, we can come, a team of us can come and give you a teach-in on this particular aspect of the law, or there's a new law that's just come in Mozambique, new oil and gas law. We've been all over this. We're doing 5 deals in Mozambique. We understand that you're doing this deal. Perhaps we could come in and give you the benefit of our experience on this. How would you like us to structure it? What would be useful? Would it be an hour or 2 hours or half a day? So that's, there are lots of ways of doing it. And the other thing that Jonathan also mentioned is, the corporates that we're dealing with at the high end of the market are enormous global institutions. And so we need to be very clever about collaborating internally to ensure that we've got the right relationships and that we are talking to each other. There's no point in going to see somebody if you haven't already picked up the phone and spoken to your colleagues in New York and in Paris and figured out what are we doing with them, who's been to see them, who knows whom. So we actually go through the process of having, we've got sort of relationship maps and diagrams of who's met whom, who knows what we've done for them, what deals we've done, what presentations we've given to them. It gets incredibly time-consuming. It's a lot of fun to do, but the best way of doing it is doing it in teams and collaborating with people.
One of the best ways, I know we're out of time, but one of the best ways to win a new client is to give them a deal. And so if you can introduce them to an opportunity, it really resonates with most of our clients, because you make them look good internally as well then. And I've found that has been, a way into new clients.
I think we'll have to wrap up there, but I'll hand over back over to Isla now just to sort of wrap us up, and I think then there's a break. But thank you very much. You've been a brilliant audience, and I really enjoyed your questions. So I think most of us are around for a little while, so feel free to come and talk to us afterwards. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you to all of you. It's great to hear more about the intricacies of how law firms and lawyers operate within that business context. We're now going to take a break, and you'll have a chance to chat to some of the panellists and other firm representatives over tea and coffee. Don't get so distracted by the excellent biscuits that you waste the opportunity to do some networking. There's plenty of people here from all 10 of the firms, so try and chat to as many as you can. And don't forget that chatting to each other is also a really useful exercise. Finally, just a note about your workshops. You're going to be attending these immediately before and after lunch. The first workshop starts promptly at 11:40, so plan to get there with about 5 minutes to spare. We're going to register you into each of them, so please only attend the workshops that you've been assigned to. If you're unsure about where to go, check at the information desk or on the boards just outside here. Thank you all and enjoy the break.